Well, hey there everyone, and welcome back to the channel this afternoon. It's a beautiful day. It's about 5:30 in the evening. Thought what we do today is we talk about knives. Now, we're not going to actually talk about the knives. What I want to actually talk about is the steel that these knives are made of. What you see in front of you is 4 different knives, and they're each made from a different type of steel. Steel has different properties depending upon how it's made and how it's constructed. And each one of these knives will be more suitable for a different type of purpose because of the steel that they're made of. So let's just get into it and talk about the 4 different types of steel that are represented by these 4 knives. So the first thing we want to look at is this knife here. This is the Bear Grylls Ultimate Survival Knife. Very popular knife. A lot of people have these. A lot of people like to buy these and put them in their kits for their survival knife. This knife is made by Gerber and is manufactured with a 420 HD steel. Now that's a little different than a 420 HC steel, which is a high carbon steel. It's very similar to another knife we're going to see that has a 1095 high carbon in it. This is a 420 HD steel. Some characteristics of this steel is that it's very soft steel. It's made with a low amount of carbon. In addition, it's going to be a steel that is easy to chip, easy to dent. It's also going to be a steel that, however, is very resistant to corrosion because it's got a fairly high amount of chromium in it. In addition, this knife is going to be very easy, as I said, very easy to sharpen, but it will also lose its edge very quickly. So this is a knife that probably, while it's a good knife for having in a toolbox, a good knife for carrying around on a daily basis, is probably not a good long-term survival knife because it's going to get dull very quickly because of the nature of the steel. Now, why do they use a steel like this? Well, first of all, it's not as expensive. It's fairly common steel. In addition, this steel is very easy to work with, easy to mold and easy to shape and easy to put an edge onto. So when you get this knife, it's extremely sharp when it comes out of the box. Like I said, it's a low resistance to rust. So this knife, it would be a good knife for instance to go underwater with, or to be in the water with, because it's not going to rust very easily. But like I said, this knife will dull quicker, but it will be very easy to sharpen in the field, even with something as simple as a whetstone. So that's the 420 HD steel. Now let's look at the other end of the spectrum. So this knife is the Benchmade Mini Bug Out knife. Compared to the Gerber, it's obviously much smaller. It's a folding knife, where the other knives I'm showing you in this video are going to be fixed blade knives. But I want to focus on the steel, not on the knife itself. So this knife is about a $50 knife. This knife is more like $150 plus knife. Now the difference is in the steel. This is a 420 HD steel. It's very soft, can be dented easily, can be chipped easily, but can be very easily sharpened. It'll lose its edge very quickly. Now, this steel is what we call a CPM S30V steel. It is made with a martensitic process, which is going to make this knife very hard. It's got a lot of chromium in it, so it's going to be very resistant to rust, similar to the Gerber knife. But it's also going to hold an edge very, very well. Out of the factory, this is very sharp, just like the Gerber knife was very, very sharp coming out of the factory. This knife will hold its edge for an extremely long time under a lot of use, but once it needs to be sharpened, it's going to have to be sharpened using some kind of a diamond sharpener. A whetstone will not be very good for sharpening this knife because it's such a hard steel. So it'll hold its edge for a long time, but when it loses its edge, you're going to have to work very hard to resharpen it. My experience with these kind of knives is that the edges do hold for a long, long time. You can certainly use this for a single camping trip without having to sharpen it. You might be able to use it for several trips without having to sharpen the knife. So I really like this knife. I like the steel it's made of. This is probably the highest end steel of the 4 I'm going to show you. The other 2 are sort of in the mid-range, and they're both made by Holtzman. This knife is made by Holtzman. It's about a $100 knife. It depends. If you look at the website, they say it's $169, but you can buy it for $100 usually on the website. I think I actually paid about $89 for this one. This is what they call the Silverback. Now, the steel on this is a D2 steel. A lot of knives are made from D2 steel. You're going to see D2 steel on a lot of things, and a lot of people really like the D2 steel. So what's so special about the D2 steel? First of all, it's got a high chromium content, much higher than the next one I'm going to show you, which is a 1095 high carbon knife. So this is a very, it's a medium carbon knife. It's got a lot of chromium in it, so it's going to be very hard. It's going to be very resistant to rust, and it's going to hold an edge extremely well. Again, this knife, just like the others I'm showing you, comes out of the box really, really sharp. I like these knives. They're nice and heavy, full tang. They've got a very thick spine on them. But the main thing about this, as you can see here, it says on the knife, it says D2 steel right here. So it's D2 steel, and this knife, as I said, is going to be very useful in the field. It's going to hold up very well. It's going to be technically a little more brittle than the 1095 high carbon that I'm going to show you next. However, these knives are all hardened in the factory, so the brittleness is not like you're going to knock it against a piece of wood or a rock and it's going to crack or fall apart. If you beat this thing with a rock, it would chip, it might break, but the reality is these knives are very, very tough knives. They can take a lot of punishment. You can baton with knives when they're this hard, where you probably could not baton very well with this knife here. This knife here is a much softer steel, probably not appropriate to do a lot of batoning with. So that's a better knife, because of the hardness, is a much better knife for batoning. Now the fourth knife I'm going to show you is made from, it's just like this knife, made also by Holtzman, but it's a little different material. So I just showed you the Silverback. I want to show you now and talk about the Holtzman Bloodline. They're very similar knives. The blade's a little different. The drop points on them are a little different. But the main thing I want to talk about is the steel. This is made from a 1095 high carbon steel. And you can see it right here if you want to zoom in on it. 1095, let's see if I can bring this up. You can see, so whoops, let's see, get it in them. It says 1095 high carbon steel. Now remember, the Silverback is made from a D2 steel, you can see. This is going to be a harder steel, that's going to be a softer steel. This steel here is going to be much better for sharpening. It's going to be easier to sharpen. So if you're not a particularly good sharpener, if it's not something that you've done a lot of and you're really talented at sharpening, a knife like this or the Bear Grylls knife is going to be easier to sharpen. Remember, the Bear Grylls knife is a 420 HD steel. It's a little softer, it'll dent easier than this. This has got chromium in it, so it's going to be a very hard steel. You can baton with this knife very easily because it is very hard, but not as hard as the D2. But it has this blade on it. If you're going to put a knife in your 3-day bug out bag, I think this is the knife I would put because if I'm using the knife often, it's going to need to be sharpened, and I want to be able to sharpen it with something as simple as a whetstone. I'm not a particularly accomplished knife sharpener, so I want something that's easier to put an edge back on than, say, the Silverback knife. So that's the difference. We saw the HD, the 420 HD steel in the Gerber knife. We see the 1095 high carbon steel in this knife, the D2 steel in the Silverback, and then the CPM S30V steel that's in the Benchmade. All of these have different purposes. You're going to have to decide for yourself which one suits your purpose better. My get-home knife is the Silverback. My 3-day bug-out bag is my Bloodline knife, simply because of the ease of resharpening it in the field. That's why I would take that for longer term, this for shorter term. Well, there you have it. 4 different knives, 4 different types of steel, 4 different cost points, and 4 different circumstances under which each of these types of steel might be the most appropriate for you. Hope you learned something. Hopefully this was helpful. Remember what we always say, be strong, be prepared, have a blessed day, and we'll see you real soon here on Cowboy Survival.